Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to our High Notes presentation. This morning, I am joined by Alan Lombardo, who is a senior safety advocate at Marsh McLennan Agency with a special focus on the manufacturing industry. Today, he's going to be going over with us OSHA and all of the things that we need to know to stay compliant, to be ready for any of those incidents where OSHA may need to be involved, and make sure you feel confident whenever you lead this presentation. So Alan, I am going to let you take it from here. If you have any questions, anything that comes through, send it through the chat, the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that, and then we'll do some little Q&A at the end as well for Alan to answer any of your questions.
So make sure, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can. You're good.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate your time. My name is Alan Lombardo. I've been doing safety for just about 20 years now, hard to believe, but I've been with Marsh McLennan for, it'll be 15 years in a month, helping out clients with everything from program development, a lot of employee training, anything that a safety manager would do, we help out with. I actually got my start in safety through the fire service, and then one thing led to another, and here I am doing the consulting thing. So once again, appreciate your time. So kind of a big and bold topic here. So OSHA's hit list 2026, act now or pay. So it's, yeah, I guess grab some attention. But the idea with today is I want to make sure that everyone kind of knows what's new in the world of OSHA, what's happening. I'm going to go over over the last year, what from a citation standpoint, what we've seen out there, what we expect in the upcoming year. And then a big part of today is I want to discuss being proactive from a planning standpoint on if OSHA were to show up, what do we do, right? And I think a lot of people hope for the best, but they don't really have a plan. And a lot of the work that I do is helping out clients that give me a phone call once OSHA shows up and they're like, hey, what do we do? And a lot of mistakes are made at that time, right? So I want to make sure that we know what to do. We have kind of the roles and responsibilities established. Hopefully it never happens and we don't have to worry about it, but it is a deal where so much happens in the first half hour or so of them showing up. It is important to kind of outline those steps, especially if you've never dealt with OSHA before. Once again, we'll go over a little bit of a plan. We'll also discuss, I don't want to just stick to OSHA. I want to talk about some of the conditions, whether it be worksite conditions, training, policies, programs, things that need to be there so that if OSHA does show up, we have those things in place. We have those controls. And then, of course, all this is about workplace safety, right? Reducing injury, reducing loss. Working for Marsh McLennan, I'm an insurance guy, so I talk insurance and reducing costs as well. And so much of it ties into that. So a lot to cover. Lots of kind of unique scenarios that we'll kind of outline throughout this training. A couple things around here, I apologize. Okay, perfect. All right, so some key points we'll discuss, and once again, this is just kind of the beginning of it. We'll go over several things here, but we talked about OSHA investigations, right? How to handle it, what we should do. In my career now, this year is a little different from a federal standpoint. There's a little bit, some changes, obviously, from a federal agency standpoint in some of the involvement I've seen. But in previous years, I would typically be involved in 10 plus OSHA inspections, OSHA informal conferences a year. So, and once again, the benefit of that is I've seen them go very well and I've seen them not go well. And oftentimes, whether they go well or not isn't really based on the circumstance of the visit. I've been in scenarios where, unfortunately, a fatality occurred, right? And I deal with those fairly often. And I'll show up and some of those scenarios and some of those OSHA investigations have gone much smoother than you would expect because of the way they were handled. I've been in scenarios where it'll be a very simple employee complaint, OSHA shows up, and then everything goes poorly because of, not having that plan. We'll talk about, this goes back to my comment about not just talking about OSHA, but also conditions or work practices that we need to have in place so that if they show up or the insurance people show up or whatever, we have a safe work environment. One of those obviously is talking about slip, trips, and falls and ergonomics. From a lost driver standpoint, so much goes back to that. In a minute here, I'm going to talk about in 2025, the most frequently cited OSHA standards. And you will see a similar trend in those standards And a lot of those things go back to slip, trips, and falls. And we'll go down a little bit more in a second. But also go over effective safety training. So we got OSHA, we have work site conditions, those slip, trips, and falls, and ergonomics, and then the programming standpoint, effective safety training. Not just doing training, but making it effective, making it work. I go to a lot of places where, I'll ask, hey, are we doing training? Do we have a training program? And the answer is yes. And then you kind of go into it and it's not effective, right? So if you're going to do it, let's train in a way that makes sense. That's time well spent. And that's kind of the key of this. When it comes to all of these practices and kind of my comment about how these all tie in, I was at a client, I guess this was 2 weeks ago now, a safety committee that I'm involved in every month. And by far their biggest loss driver is slip, trips, and falls. And when I look at a lot of the injuries they've dealt with, they do the training, they have the processes, they're very OSHA compliant focused, but the communication isn't there, the consistency isn't there. And they had a slip and fall that we were able to watch on camera, see the entire thing from start to finish. Up to this point, they'd had a great safety year, right? Only a couple very minor injuries, frequency was way down. Watch the video. Food processing plant, I do a lot of work in the food industry. And this was it looked to be a very minor fall on just someone who a wrong step on a same level surface, fell, caught herself with her arm, ended up breaking her arm and wrist in 5 locations, right? And when I think about that scenario, it goes back to all the things that could have been done differently to prevent that. And there were several things that stood out, obviously, as I reviewed it, but a very simple scenario when we look at what happened. And you could have seen this video and you could have watched it 10 times and you would assume this person was fine. They could get right back up and keep working. But that's not the case, right? So little changes from a programming standpoint, training standpoint, facility inspection standpoint make a huge difference. That claim now with the nature of the injury is going to be, months and months of recovery, multiple surgeries, a very costly injury. And that's unfortunate, right? But that's what can happen when it comes to these areas. And that's why these topics are so important, is you can minimize them and you can say, well, at our facility, we don't have many stairs. We're not working from heights. But once again, some of the most costly claims I deal with are people falling from same level. What can we do about it, right? They can be frustrating, and oftentimes you can feel like there's not a whole lot you can do. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things you can do. Once again, being proactive, not reactive when it comes to safety. All right. Sometimes when I hit spacebar, it mutes me. So if you can't hear me, somebody speak up. Don't let me talk for half an hour and no one can hear me. So this was I mentioned that I want to start going over the each year OSHA releases their most frequently cited standards. And this slide you see here relates to all injuries, right? Which normally I don't do it this way, but I do think it helps to kind of show some of the messaging that I want to relay here. But this will be construction and manufacturing across the board, right? General industry as well. And you'll see, and I'm going to go over this in more detail, but you'll see out of the 10 most frequently cited standards, 6,000, almost 7,000 violations specific to fall protection. And that would be, just kind of general requirements, harnesses, everything that ties under that fall protection window, hazard communication. And a lot of these aren't a surprise, right? These are things we see year after year. But what I wanted to point out, you'll see fall protection is number 1. 3 is ladders. 6 is scaffolding, working from heights. 7 is fall protection training requirements. So of the top 10, we see 1, 2, 3, is it 4 or 5? Yeah, 4 of the specific standards are related to falls, slip, trips, and falls, right? Why is that? What OSHA does is, when you look at their emphasis and what they always push, there's twofold, right? There's the frequency aspect. What do we see common across the board? They're going to focus on that. What do we see as things that have the highest risk of injury? Lockout, tagout is one you're always going to see. Number 4, control of hazardous energy. And they want to focus on the things that have the biggest impact. We know from an injury standpoint, and I'm sure everyone on this call kind of deals with it at their own facility, slip, trips, and falls, ergonomics, safe lifting, material handling is typically always our number 1 loss driver. So why is OSHA focusing on that? Because they know that as well, right? That so many places you go to, there are fall hazards, conditions, floor condition, inadequate footwear, so many things that can lead to people slipping and falling. Training is a big one as well, right? Are we training people on these conditions? What's there? What's present? How to stay safe? there are so many variables now that go into this. I mean, phones being a big one, right? I go to a lot of places where people are on their phones, they're not paying attention, they're distracted. Long shifts. That same company that I mentioned I was at a couple weeks ago, and they had that unfortunate fall injury. They work oftentimes, 12-hour shifts, very little rotation from a workforce standpoint. So you have individuals that are working in the same area, not moving around much, a lot of repetitive motion. When they do move around, right, they've been in one location, one spot for a long period of time. They're not as familiar. They've been stationary for a long time, right? So those infrequent tasks, infrequent motions, oftentimes can lead to people getting hurt. Floor conditions change. You walk around, you're used to tending to one spot, you take that first step, you slip and fall, right? Basic housekeeping. So much kind of ties into that, but it is important to see what OSHA is looking for, because not only do we want to know in case they show up, right? We want to have a plan, but what OSHA looks for is often driven by the industry exposure, what's happening from an injury and a safety standpoint. So that's why we see that here. So diving a little bit more into it, right? So I want to break these out with some more specifics. So obviously, number one, fall protection, hazard communication, ladders. From a compliance standpoint, some of these things are fairly straightforward. We know some are a little more challenging. If any of you guys on the call work in locations or facilities where we have a lot of chemicals, a lot of inventory, things coming and going, a lot of purchasing, we know hazard communication can be a real challenge on how to deal with that. A lot of moving parts. If we have nothing in place and we're building it from scratch and we've got years and years worth of chemical storage, it's a big task, right? There's a lot to it. It's a lot of kind of pick up the pieces of what was done before. From a compliance standpoint, there's a lot to look at, right? They know that there's many standards that kind of fall under that HazCom requirement. So compliance can be challenging. So it is a difficult one to meet. Why is it so important, and why do we see kind of year after year being a major focus for OSHA? Is because of that exposure. Everyone's got chemicals, everyone's dealing with it. It's tied into so much of operation that they want to make sure people are doing it the right way. We've all seen, and even in my life, kind of growing up, you'll never forget being homesick from school and watching commercials during the day, and there'll be things about if you work in this industry in this time period and now you have silicosis or whatever it might be. So much of that goes back to HazCom, right? Long, prolonged exposure to a chemical without having adequate controls, right? That's what HazCom's all about. Lockout tagout, we talked about. We all know lockout tagout, why that matters. Respiratory protection, scaffolding, once again, the fall hazard, right? So this is the top 6 here. And then this rounds out top 10, fall protection training. Power industrial trucks, why is that a concern? Forklifts are everywhere. A lesser frequency of injury typically, but a high severity, right? Forklifts are very heavy. When people have forklift-related injuries, they can be very severe. So it's going to be a focus of OSHA always. Face protection and then machine guarding. That rounds out the top 10. From a trend aspect, what do I see different this year than the previous years when I look at these totals? Clearly a big focus on fall protection. Last year, the same 10 are similar year after year. Some kind of fall off depending on what's going on, but what's number 1 versus what's number 5 will change, right? And that's where I see that more of that focus on fall protection. Hence the importance of slip, trips, and falls, and ergonomics as well, right? Poor ergonomic conditions can lead to people falling. All right, so OSHA investigations. This is a big one here, right? And I enjoy talking about this. I could do an hour training just on how to handle OSHA investigations because there's so much to it. And once again, if you're a facility where you don't have a plan, and maybe it's because OSHA's never shown up, right? We never had that exposure. They show up, mistakes get made, right? So it's important, like with anything else. I always recommend, and we actually have a little training PowerPoint that I send out some of the clients I work with on training supervisors, training managers on what to do if OSHA shows up. And I do think that's an important part of every safety program. And it's not that we want to, create a false narrative or paint a picture and tell everyone to go on break and do all these kind of things. But it's, if they're here, what are we going to do, right? Who's going to say what? Who's going to lead the charge? Establishing those roles and responsibilities, having that plan. And I'm going to go over some recommendations today on what that looks like. But if we don't have a plan now, I really recommend considering it. Once again, OSHA is a big part of what I do, dealing with them. I've seen many companies that have great safety programs, and they handle this the wrong way, and it makes things difficult. I had one not too long ago with a company owner who I like him. He's a great guy, but very proud of his safety program, and just said way too much, right? And just exposed himself to further critique that was not going to happen initially, right? Which we'll go over here in a minute as well. But that's where you can make some of these mistakes. If OSHA's here for one reason, that's why they're here. We don't need to brag about how great things are, because the more you give them, the more they can see, the more potential questions and scrutiny you're going to fall under, right? So it's not about hiding anything, but staying on track, staying on course is a big part of this plan. All right, so how are OSHA inspections conducted? The OSHA Act authorizes OSHA compliance, safety, and health officers to conduct workplace inspections at reasonable times. Many factors kind of go into this. Things they see, unsafe conditions. I'll go over here in a minute the factor that I deal with most, but OSHA conducts inspections without advance notice, except in rare circumstances. Imminent danger. If they were to drive by and they see someone on a roof, they could stop and they could do an inspection. That's super rare. In the 15 years I've done consulting on this, maybe twice I've had that be the case. One of them was a job site where it was outside Chicago, where they were building a high rise next to an OSHA office, right? So it's like, not an ideal scenario to be cutting corners when it comes to safety, right? But rarely does that happen where they're going to just happen to drive by. Something to point out, anyone who tells an employer about an OSHA inspection in advance can receive fines and jail time. Once again, I've never dealt with that, but they have the right to be there. They have the right to inspect work conditions. Once again, there are many factors that kind of go into that, but it's their job, right? And it's important they do it, that they hold people accountable. If something's not happening in a safe way, they can show up. They have the legal authority to do so without any further notice, any time of day. It doesn't really matter, right? It's up to them on how they want to do that. All right, so some of the different types of inspections, how it can work out. Imminent danger, right? That would be seeing with their eyes a visual cue of a danger. Fatality or hospitalization. This is by far, and I was kind of waiting for the slide, this is by far the thing that in my career, and across the board, it's not just me personally, but the number one factor that goes into it is say you have an amputation, you report to OSHA, they show up the next day. By far, that's, of the last like 10 of these I've been a part of, as far as on-site OSHA presence, that's what has occurred. There's been a serious injury, we report to OSHA, and then the next day they're there, or the day after next they show up, right? So from a staffing standpoint, it makes sense. They're limited. They're more limited now than they have been in a long time from a resource aspect. So where are they going to spend their time? They're going to go to places where they see the injury, they see the exposure, they know there's a concern. Amputation is a good example. If there's an amputation, 9 times out of 10, they're going to show up and they want to see your lockout program. They want to see the machines. Was there adequate guarding? Typically, and this is from a safety standpoint and compliance as well, if you have adequate guarding, if we're locking up machines as we should, then an amputation is kind of impossible. And that's typically OSHA's stance is, hey, if someone lost a finger and I show up, if the machine was guarded, it wouldn't have happened. If the guard was removed and it was locked out, it wouldn't have happened, right? So that's where they're going to dig in. The second one that is the most common scenario where I see OSHA on site would be worker complaints or referrals, which happens a lot. I'm sure most people on this call have probably dealt with this as well. Normally, though, the complaints don't lead to an on-site visit. They lead to a documentation request, which means, hey, we got a phone call from so-and-so. They said that they're not properly trained on forklifts and the forklifts are being operated in a way that is unsafe. Then they'll request that you send them as the employer copies of training records, what your training program looks like. They look at it. If it looks good, they say, great, it's gone, right? No issue. That happens a lot. And no big deal, right? So if you're on this call and this has never happened, if and when it does happen, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, don't panic, right? It's fairly routine that OSHA will send a documentation request. It does not mean they're going to show up necessarily, but pay attention to your response, right? Be thorough, respond in a way that is adequate. Don't overshare, right? Stick to what they're asking. It's not your time to brag. It's just address what conditions they've asked you to address, and then typically you're fine, right? Now, if you were to respond and they can see that you have back to the forklift example, and they see you have a really shabby forklift program, your training is not adequate, the individual who says they weren't trained, in fact, was not trained, then they might show up. But if everything's fine, you're okay. Targeted inspections. So local emphasis programs, national emphasis programs, particular hazards and industries. Several years ago, silica was the emphasis. So a lot of when you go back to the story, citations, a lot of them were due to silica, them going on site. They had one when the HAZCOM standard changed a decade or so ago. That was a big focus, right? That was one of the national emphasis programs. One that's currently being pushed, and honestly, I think would have already been in motion. It kind of is in motion. They're talking about it, but there's no real standard per se to back it up yet. Is a heat injury prevention program. That's a new focus. So the idea with this is, and as of now, OSHA uses the general duty clause to typically implement and enforce heat safety concerns, right? They go to a facility, it's 95 degrees inside, they could cite you under the general duty clause. With this new national emphasis on heat safety, some of the details are still vague, but the idea is, and I do think it's going to be formalized sooner than later, right? So if you're on this call and you work in a facility where it's 95 degrees in the summer, just kind of be in mind that this will be a consideration more so in the future. A requirement of formal processes. I think 80 degrees is the current temperature they're looking at. It was 78 for a while. It's not done. It's not set in stone, but it's actively. I think as of April 10th was the last time they had a kind of a hearing on it. It will happen at some point. I'd be surprised if it doesn't. But the idea behind this, and once again, more details to come, but is that heat safety assessments will need to be completed. If the facility is over 80 degrees, certain controls will need to be in place, whether it be shaded areas, cool down stations, some of those details to be determined. And then there'll be people that are there to kind of facilitate the heat safety program. Normally that'd be a safety manager, right? So big concern, right? There are plenty of places I go to that in the summertime, it's 90 degrees and that's what it's like all summer. And the idea of air conditioning a huge facility isn't going to happen, right? So it will be a concern for a lot of people. Understandably so, right? It's gonna take some work to kind of get there, but from a national emphasis standpoint, what we see in the future is definitely going to be more of that push when it comes to heat safety. And I understand why. I don't go there anymore. I used to go to a place in Pensacola, Florida, and you would go in there and it would be close to 100 degrees for months at a time. Really difficult conditions, right? So that's really what's driving the force is there hasn't been a standard specifically on that other than the general duty clause, right? So they want to more formalize it because there are many, many facilities. Once again, I've been to several of them where it's just unsafe with how hot it is inside those environments. So something to keep in mind. If it's a concern for you, now's the time to put together a little bit of plan on how you can address some of those things. All right, so stage of inspection. So, excuse me, this is kind of what I mentioned about having that plan, having a policy on ensuring that people know roles and responsibilities in the event of OSHA showing up. Here's what happens, right? So these 4 steps are what you should expect each time OSHA shows up. First thing is asking for credentials. Totally understandable, right? Asking them, who are they? Why are they here? What's kind of the basis of their investigation? And they'll tell you right then, right? We had a complaint. We're here to look at this. They'll kind of set the stage of what their initial visit looks like. At this point, I work with a lot of companies that don't have a full-time safety person. And I tell them all the time, I say, listen, OSHA shows up, ask OSHA to wait, and you're going to reach out to your safety rep, myself. And then as soon as I get there, we can start the conference. We can start the open conference. That's fine. You can do that, right? So it's not a problem. Don't feel like it's something that you're inconveniencing OSHA and they're going to be mad at you. It's within the realm of what some of these expectations are. So if you need time, if you have a safety person, maybe you have a safety person that's at another site, let OSHA know, hey, our safety representative is currently doing whatever. Can you please give us half an hour or so? You can wait in this room. They're on their way. Right? Totally fine. I have clients do it all the time, and they want me there during the walkthrough. That's fine. Then you'll have the opening conference. The opening conference is where you can find out details on what they're there for. Right? Well, we received a complaint. we had a forklift incident. We want to find out more about it. We want to know what's going on. At that point, once you know what the scope is, address what your approach is going to be. You're not there to give them a tour, right? Like you're there to give them a tour within the realm of why they're there, right? So I mentioned the owner that I was working with, who was very proud of their safety program. He gave the OSHA guy a big tour of the facility. Why does that matter? Anything they see during the inspection is subject to further discussion and additional citations. If they're there for a reason, try to keep them in that area, right? And once again, you're not trying to hide anything. It's just being appropriately cautious given the reality of a working environment, right? So find out why they're there. From there, you'll do the walkthrough. You'll do the walkthrough with them. Don't just give them free range. If OSHA takes a photo of something, you take a photo as well. Find out what they're thinking. Ask questions. Document. I've been in many scenarios, like with anything, especially federal jobs, there's a good amount of turnover, right? There's a lot of knowledge lost in some of the people who are retiring and people coming right out of school. I've been in one specifically I can think about where OSHA cited something, took a photo that was incorrect. And we were able to challenge it because we documented what was done. We had the exact same photo that individual had showing a different scenario. And we weren't arguing or trying to say, you guys are stupid or whatever. It was just purely factual on what's going on, right? So gather the information. When you're walking around with them, find out while they're there. Stay with them the entire time. Find out what they're thinking. Ask those questions. Eliminate some of those surprises. I've been to places where they have a huge facility with multiple entrances. I'll go back to the forklift scenario because it's the easiest one to kind of talk through. And the forklifts and the warehouse is on like the northwest corner of the building. We've actually walked around to that door. That is the door for the warehouse area, rather than walking them through the entire building. Why would you want to do that? Because you walk through the building, you can see everything. If they want to go to the warehouse, take them to the warehouse. You don't need to give them a tour, right? That's part of some of the planning and part of some of the training is how to handle that stuff. If they show up and they want this, here's how we do it. If they show up and they want to go to this area, here's how we can strategically get there. Once again, not hiding, not being suspicious, just being reasonable on staying within the scope of the visit. Then there'll be the closing conference, right? Ask questions again. This is where they're going to outline kind of what they saw. If something is incorrect, we can speak on it here, right? Unfortunately, there have been many times where, and I think some of this goes with age, some of the newer OSHA, OSHA consultants aren't as comfortable speaking on some of this stuff, which is unfortunate. But I've been in many closing conferences where it seems like everything went great, and then some months later we got citations anyway. And it's like, man, we try to talk through this, and aggravating to be in those scenarios, but typically they'll disclose certain things. At that point, if they're off base, talk through it, right? Find out where they're at, and then you get to know exactly, typically, of what's going to happen next based on that closing conference, right? So be involved in the process. Have a plan. Who's going to say what? Where we're going to take them. If you have someone on your team who is especially good at communicating, would be better handling someone in this type of scenario, have them in that role, right? Make sure the right people are involved so that we can minimize that exposure. I've been to many places, and I'm sure you guys have people at your facilities that you can think of where you would not want them talking to OSHA. Maybe they've had a bad experience and they don't like authority, and keep that person away, right? So all of that goes into having a plan. If you don't have a plan and they show up, once again, issues can happen. From here, I think you have 9 months or so. I could be wrong by a month or so for them to issue the citations. It's kind of frustrating. You can then do several things when it comes to the information they give you. You can just accept it, address the corrective actions that they send from an abatement standpoint, pay the fine, it's done. What I always recommend is scheduling an informal conference. The informal conference is where you can talk through what your abatement strategy is with OSHA, address the citations that were given, and most importantly, talk about a reduction in fee or a reclassification of standards, right? That is the time to do it, and it's the only time to do it. So if you don't schedule an informal, you kind of lose your right to contest some of this stuff. The informal, every single time I do one, assuming that that we put our best foot forward, expect a reduction in fees of 30 to 40%, typically, right? Don't hold me to that, but normally that's where you're able to kind of show how rich you are, what your abatement's going to look like, and then once again, after that reduction in fee, they then will revise their document, send it to you, you sign it, you pay the fee, you move forward. The reason I want to show this slide now, there are certain scenarios where I don't recommend doing it that way, right? So 4 types of potential penalties. other than serious are going to be your least citation or your least serious citation, something like a documentation issue. Maybe you did not submit your OSHA logs, right? That could be a citation that would be listed as an other than serious. The vast majority of citations are considered serious. Forklift, lockout, machine guarding, PP issues are all going to be a serious citation. Willful and repeat, the reason I wanted to jump to this slide here, are the ones where I typically do not recommend doing informal conferences. I recommend getting legal representation, right? Because there is a real potential here for substantial citation amounts in the six figures, if not more, depending on the scenario, and other legal repercussions. So if you're having a repeat or a willful, I recommend getting an attorney involved. There are several OSHA attorneys that can help out there. Willful basically means that they have proof to show that you willingly put someone in harm's way and ignored safety. Not ideal. Repeat means they were here last year, they cited you for lockout, they came back, the same issue still exists, right? So there's a little bit of negligence that's involved with both of those, so OSHA views it differently. More severe, bigger consequence, bigger citation, right? So I always recommend informal for other than serious or serious, and then I do recommend, not always, but typically legal involvement when you get to the willful or repeat. It's up to you guys, obviously, on how you want to handle it, but there's just a lot at stake when you get to that point. And normally, I've been in scenarios where I've seen repeat or willful violations reclassified to serious or other than serious because of legal involvement, right? They're able to handle that a little differently. So a lot there when it comes to handling OSHA, but once again, having that plan makes all the difference. A lot of mistakes are made just because of poor handling of them showing up, right? So having that plan, understanding what's there, what could happen, what could go wrong, being cordial, right? They're typically not there to get anyone in trouble, but if you have that plan, you can minimize that potential impact. All right, so now we've talked about OSHA. Now I want to jump into some of the on-site conditions that can lead to injuries. OSHA showed it to begin with, right? That's slip, trips, and falls and ergonomics. From a light industrial standpoint, I work a lot in the food industry. That's become a little bit of my niche over the years. Obviously, in food, you get a little bit of, laceration, knife concerns, but so much just goes back to slip, trips, and falls and ergonomics, right? What can we do about it? How do we create a safer work environment? There are things we can do, right? We've got to have that process in place to address some of these concerns. And so much of it is being formal, right? Not skipping over some of these steps, not downplaying kind of the responsibility when it comes to slip, trips, and falls. The injury that I was just talking about, right, at that food plant where the guy, with the individual fell and now there's a broken arm in 5 locations. Footwear was not great, right? Like I've been telling them to have a better shoe policy for a long time. They were wearing a slip-and shoe, but not one that I felt was adequate. Housekeeping was good, but not great, right? They slipped because there were wet conditions in the environment, right? So things could have been done differently. That claim will probably end up being close to $500,000 if I had to guess, right? You think about all of the money, the time, the resources that could have been put to prevent that from occurring. It's time and resources well spent, right? And that's the reality of some of these slips and falls. So common hazards, right? And they're common everywhere you go, right? You walk around, you see these day in, day out. And that's what can make it tricky is you think, well, we have these everywhere. We can't fix them all. Being realistic, having priorities, what we can address. Unsafe floors and walking surfaces. If we work in an environment where we know the floors are damaged, we have bad curbs. I was working at a car dealership for a while where all their medians were painted the same color as the parking lot. And people and customers would trip over them. I'm like, let's just paint them yellow. Let's try that. That alone reduced the amount of liability claims and customers tripping substantially, right? Just little things like that make a big difference. Spills, having a spill process to clean up spills in a timely manner, right? Getting them addressed. Not just, something fell, somebody spilled something, make sure you clean it up. Well, if we have that type of program, we know that spill can sit there for an hour or hours. How people are walking past that in that period of time. Cords across travel paths, horseplay, poor ladder stool use, making sure that we have the right tools for the job. General distractions, clutter, improper storage, snow and ice. All of these, when you look at them, once again, you can look at it and say, well, clean up your mess, pay attention. Don't be distracted. We all say that kind of stuff, but when you have an actual program around it to ensure consistency, that's how you address it. That's how you become a little more proactive. So how they can be addressed, right? So we know things can be addressed right away. And that's where training is so important, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is people know what the expectation is. You spill something, you clean it up. You drop something, you pick it up. If people see there's a mess everywhere, and I observe this in a lot of places that I go to, is if there's a mess all over, what's the next guy going to do if he spills something? Nothing about it, right? Well, it's a mess all over the place. Whereas if you work in an environment where the standard is high and there's a mess, what are people going to do? They clean it up because there's an expectation of a certain level of cleanliness, of housekeeping. So we set that standard, right? Safety culture, that's what it all comes down to. Housekeeping clutter, we address it timely. Other hazards may need more time. Uneven walkways, maybe we need concrete work done, maybe we need to paint certain areas. Poor lighting, fixing lighting, improving lighting. I was at a place yesterday where they had, over the last 6 months, switched all their lighting to LED lighting. The difference that made, amazing, right? From just the brightness of it, you're more awake, you're more alert, you can see hazards, you can see if there's, cleanliness issues, huge difference. So adequate lighting is important. If we have bad lighting, that's going to, significantly increase the potential for someone to fall. And then unsecure equipment, assessing the environment, right? Seeing what's there. Is it set up in a way that is as safe as possible? Are things uneven? Do we have ladders that aren't stable, stools that are bent? All of those factors can lead to somebody falling. When we talk about short-term versus long-term here, things that can be addressed right away versus things that aren't, that's where having a formal process, documentation. I do a lot of mock kind of OSHA inspection facilities, and I'll show up and I'll write them a report. I'll send it to them. If they have a good process in place, those issues can be addressed quickly. There are places I go to, I'll write them a report. I'll show up 6 months later, nothing has been done. Well, why wasn't anything done? It's because it's a lot of finger pointing. Well, I thought maintenance was going to do this. I talked to this production manager. They said they would do it. You got to have a process, right? You need to have some sort of documentation where we're signing responsibilities, we're following up. This issue is fixed by this date. We're going to follow up at this point, right? All of that's really important when it comes to ensuring these things actually get corrected and they don't just become another stack of papers and things to do, right? Because we know maintenance is always busy. So we got to prioritize these things. So some physical factors, something that I'm always hearing, and this is probably because I'm in the insurance world and the carriers are always talking about this, is an aging workforce, right? What does that mean if I'm the insurance carrier? It means a greater exposure that I'm concerned about, right? I've got an aging workforce. What do we see there with an aging workforce? We see an increased risk for some of these material handling injuries. We see a bigger risk for slip, trips, and falls. If that individual does slip, trip, or fall, we see a larger or a more severe injury occurring, right? Where maybe a younger individual wouldn't have that same thing happen. What does that matter for us? What can we do about it, right? Adapt the environment for those conditions, right? The first one here, your vision, age, mobility. This kind of goes into ergonomics. Do we have the work environment set up in a way where it's convenient, where things are streamlined, where people aren't having to bend and twist and move around in ways that are unnatural? That's going to greatly affect mobility. Vision goes back to light. Do we have adequate lighting? Are we having people work in conditions that are not set up in an ergonomic way, right? That's going to be a big factor. Staying alert, proper rest, proper breaks. I go to places, and I know there's a lot that goes into this, and me being a safety person, it's easy for me to say this stuff, but if we're looking at a place where, they're working 12-hour shifts and they get, 3 or 4 15-minute breaks, there's going to be a lot of fatigue. It's going to be difficult to stay productive and safe in that type of environment, right? So being alert, certain medications, communication of what's going on, right? If someone's on medication where it says this medication may affect drowsiness, may affect, balance, all of those things are things that we need to consider when it comes to what someone's doing, right? Putting the phone down seems easy, right? But distractions, making sure people can focus on what they're doing, very important, right? If we can address these factors, and the first thing is to kind of identify them, right? What physical factors do we have in our work environment? Are we doing what we need to do to address them, or are we ignoring them, right? If we're not addressing them to begin with, or if we haven't identified them, then we're not doing enough. right, to account for the people that work there. Someone's age should not be a consideration or a factor when it comes to getting hurt. We know it is, but we have to set up the work environment to fit the individuals who are doing the job, right? That's an important part of it. So hierarchy of controls. Eliminating the hazard, right? Can we change it and do it safer? It can be all sorts of things. I'll go back to my experience in the food industry. If we before had people lifting and having to bend and reach way above their shoulders, and now we give them a tool that allows them to not have to reach as high, we've now reduced that exposure, right? Make it better, make it safer. Engineering controls, railings, guardrails, establishing walkways, addressing floor conditions, proper lighting once again. Administrative controls, signage, training, job rotation, right? All very important things. Once again, if someone's in one spot for 8, 10, 12 hours doing the same job, the expectation that they can do that forever and not have an injury is just not realistic, right? So identify that stuff. And then personal protective equipment. Are we providing what they need to have? Anti-fatigue mats, appropriate chairs. You got a lot of places where people are sitting in chairs and in a posture that's not going to allow them to do the job for a long period of time. Adequate footwear, ensuring that, and this is a real challenge nowadays. I mean, the types of slip-resistant shoes that are available now is crazy, right? It's really hard to identify. I go to a lot of places and I'll like, oh, that's not an appropriate shoe. They'll take it off. Oh, no, it is. It just looks like it's a tennis shoe now. So making sure that it's not just a slip-resistant shoe, it's a shoe that fits our environment. If it's especially wet, if it's an area where, things are sticking to the treads of someone's feet, are they appropriate? Have we addressed it? I go back to the injury that I'm dealing with now, right? With the multiple breaks in the arm. If a better shoe or a more formal shoe program would have prevented that one injury, then whatever cost that shoe program would not have mattered, right? You're saving, right? And that's the way you have to look at it. Is it might seem like a burden initially, but if you break it down to what exposure you're preventing, it makes a lot of sense, right? So that's a big factor to consider with this. Ergonomics. So ergonomic 101, right? Walking through, identifying awkward postures, overreaching, repetitive motion, forceful exertion, vibration. So you can't tell I'm a tall guy, right? So if you're really tall and you're in an environment where you're having to bend over or scrunch for a long period of time, it's going to take a toll, right? Same thing if you're a shorter person and the conveyor is at mid-chest level, you're having to reach and work higher. So ensure that the environment fits the individual. If we're not looking for it, you're not going to see it, right? But even in an office space, getting the right kind of chair, making sure that screens are set up in a way that allows people to sit in a posture where you're working 8, 10-hour days and you're bending and your neck's bent down. Doing just a simple awkward bend like that for 8 hours can lead to a real injury, right? Could lead to a surgery, right? So addressing some of these conditions: posture, reaching, repetitive motion, forceful exertion, vibration. All of these things can be addressed with the right kind of forward thinking, with the right kind of planning. A little more ergonomics here. Awkward postures, twisting, reaching, tilting. And if we're not looking for it, once again, you're not going to see it, right? So pay attention to some of these things. Basic stuff by saying, well, lift with your knees, not your back. That helps obviously, but if they're in an environment where they're required to do that in order to complete the job, you can talk all day. I can tell people all day long, make sure you lift with your knees, not your back. Then they have to do a job that requires them to bend in a way where the only way they can do it is to lift with their back. It's not going to be effective, right? You got to address some of these things. Up here. All right, some more stressors. Natural. So this is one I always like because it seems kind of goofy, right? But just general posture, right? Just this. If someone's on their feet all day long, telling them that posture makes a big difference. I think the average human head weighs like 8 or 9 pounds, right? So if you're drooping forward and your head is forward in front of your shoulders, that 8 pounds, 10 pounds of force continually on your shoulders, on your neck can create a problem, right? So paying attention to the little things, going back to the aging workforce aspect, right? These little things really do make a big difference as people age, as your body kind of suffers some of the wear and tear. Posture makes a big difference. Having a wellness program, stretching, job rotation, all really makes a huge difference, right? The comfort of the individual, setting them up for success. I've said it a million times, proactive, not reactive. Don't wait until someone has an issue. Don't wait until someone says, oh, you got a back issue. Chances are that same person who has the back issue because of that job, all the people around them have the same concern, right? They maybe have worked through the pain or they haven't had the issue yet. But if we identify it, if we assess the environment, we fix it before it becomes a claim, before it becomes a complaint. That's the idea with this. So some prevention tips, sitting close to the work that's occurring, right? You see the individual in this photo here, perfect body posture, elbows are bent at a right angle. The desk is exactly where it needs to be. The height of the screen allows the person to look forward, not having to bend up or down to see it. You go to a lot of places where it's not set up this way at all. And it's easy, again, to downplay the significance of it. But when you see it done correctly, especially like in this photo, it's easy to see, well, wow, yeah, this person could do this for a period of time and not suffer from any unnecessary discomfort. And that's, once again, ergonomics 101. And that's what it's all about, setting it up in a situation that makes sense. It is. I'm a little behind on time here, so I'm going to speed through some of these things. Some ergonomic stressors, we know repetitive motion, that's where, once again, that job rotation, setting up the work environment in a way that fits the individual makes such a big difference. So some other factors to consider, right? This goes back to the importance of having or looking into some type of wellness program. And it can be very simple, or it could be, very, very kind of detailed. Excuse me here. Allergies are getting to me this time of year. Physical fitness, health problems, physical characteristics, prior injuries, promoting a healthy lifestyle, right? Excuse me. So at my facility, we have a wellness program. We can earn wellness points by doing certain things. Have fun with it, right? Make it, vending machine options, different things like that. Once again, if you make it fun, make it something that everyone gets involved in, it can make a difference, right? To address some of these physical factors that can lead to poor conditions. If someone isn't in poor physical health and they're having to work on their feet for a long period of time, they're obviously going to be more likely to have an injury, right? So let's try to help these people out and give them some resources so that they can continue to improve. We talked about most of these stressors here. I'm going to skip around, but I've been talking about a lot of stuff. So this one here, some ergonomic programs. So I'm not a big technology guy, but I'm getting out of my own way a little bit. Technology is amazing with some of this stuff. The AI stuff, it's scary. This photo here, right? There's a lot of apps now. Some of them are free, where you can take a video of someone doing the job. It automatically, within a matter of seconds, will generate a image that shows, green means no strain, orange means some relative, unnatural position, red means a more significant strain. And you can pinpoint with some of this technology, you can pinpoint exactly when during this task the greatest level of physical strain, physical exertion is occurring. Why that matters is it kind of goes back to my comment about, well, the idea of lifting with your knees, not your back. With this technology, you can address exactly when in the production process the most significant strain or most significant hazard occurs, right? So you can be very precise and deliberate on how you implement certain controls, right? So very valuable, right? So the idea of, well, we've got to lift this stuff as part of the job, or, there's nothing to do about it, just part of what how production is. That may be true, but a small change at a strategic time could address statistically the vast majority of where the greatest impact occurs. And that's where some of this technology is so important. So something to look into. It's ever changing. It's kind of, like I said, it's amazing what's happening here. There are people who are much better at it than I am, but look into it. Look into some of these resources. Once again, you go back to some of these claims that we've dealt with in the past. If the use of some of these tools could address even one of these high dollar claims, it's a huge win. And that's how we got to be thinking, right? Of not like we're going to reinvent the wheel, but if we can address a few things each year, we're going to have a much better year moving forward, little by little, right? All right, so back to safety training. I'm going to have to zoom through some of this, but training is incredibly important. And it goes back to that aspect of a safety culture, right? Having a company where, there's open communication. So many times I go into a facility and me being a third-party person coming in, oftentimes people are eager to share ideas with me because I know I'm kind of there to help, right? Maybe they feel like it's their opportunity to speak up. But you hear so many things just from communicating to individuals who are doing the job. How can we make it safer? How can we address those economic concerns? Where during the task is it the least efficient, right? So Key elements of a effective safety program. Number one is orientation. From the get-go, we establish what matters, that communication is there. People know that from day one, we care about safety because we've trained you accordingly. It empowers an individual. That's what it's all about. If I start a job and I've been there 6, 8 months and no one's trained me, what am I thinking? They don't care about me. They don't care about safety. They don't care about my future with the company, right? Where if I'm having in-depth, hands-on orientation, it just empowers me so much as an individual to stay safe and to take ownership of my actions, right? So key element, focus on from day one, that orientation. I'm having a formal training schedule to follow, right? Like it's not just we talk about it at the end of the year and we're done. Routine, toolbox talk, safety huddles, each week getting people together to talk about safety, what's going on. Once again, open communication, giving individuals, employees opportunities to offer feedback, very, very important. I entered the safety committee here because, when you think about what a safety committee is, it's a time for people to sit down, prioritize, talk, strategy. It's training in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's more than that, but it is absolutely training people on how to address some of these things, having a process to stay productive, to address concerns. So I'm a big believer in safety committees. There's a lot they can do. And then continual education, right? Like having that process of how we can learn, how we can get better. If we've been doing training for years and years and it isn't effective, reevaluate it. What are we missing? Where is it? Is it a communication? Is it a language barrier? Is it we're just showing videos, right? There's not any engagement. Find out ways to make the training effective. It's easy to kind of communicate this because you think back to any level of schooling you've been in. You had a teacher that you really liked. Why did you like that teacher? Typically, it's because they were a good trainer. They were a good teacher. They properly conveyed the information. They gave you an opportunity to succeed. Safety training is the exact same thing, right? If we're giving people those same tools, they'll be successful. We talk about this, right? Why it matters. Reducing premiums, enhancing that reputation, right? People know that there's a high safety standard, increases productivity, increases buy-in, reduces absenteeism, right? We're invested, we're a team, we're there together. And then, of course, legal protection, OSHA requirements, all the other things that fall under that umbrella. So a hands-on portion as well, right? Of not just a classroom, not just a video, it's supervisors, it's management, it's mentors getting involved, right? Here's what it looks like. Do you feel comfortable with this? Here's your exits, here's your fire extinguishers, here's your eye wash stations. If this happens, talk to me. Here's our box for if you have good ideas, put your ideas into this box. If anything happens, come to me, come to this person. Once again, part of that team. The mentoring aspect of training, that hands-on portion is very important when it comes to success. And the benefits, again, we talked about the safe training orientation, boosting morale, that safety culture, compliance, helping employee retention, increase awareness. Training is time well spent, but once again, make sure it's training that's effective. Make sure it's not just you checking a box and saying, oh yeah, we do training. Does it work, right? Does it make sense? If not, let's do it different, right? So many places you go to and yeah, training, we've tried it, it hasn't worked. Try something different, right? Don't give up. Don't think, well, there's no way of doing it. There is a way to make training effective. If you haven't figured it out yet, have a strategy. Try again. Try different things. Try different ideas. The end result is worth the investment. Let's skip over a few of these. So some final thoughts here. Once again, proactive versus reactive. And so much of this, right? Whether it's OSHA on site, having that plan, whether it's addressing ergonomic concerns, right? How are you going to address it? Proactive. We're not going to wait till that person gets hurt. To me, training is all about being proactive, right? Communication, being direct, setting expectations. Once again, that orientation is key to success, right? You start out and immediately the standard is set of, wow, this place really does care about my safety. It is vested in my future. They want me to show up. They want me to work hard because of how much has been invested from day one. Addressing slip, fall, and ergonomic risks. If we're not looking for them, you're not going to see them, right? You've been doing something the same way for years and years. I showed you some technology stuff. There's so much there. As time changes or times change, take advantage of those resources. What's present? What can be used to create a safer work environment? It never ends when it comes to ergonomics, right? So be trying new things, safer, efficient, whatever it might be. Employee training, creating a safe work environment, all those things are included. I know I went over a lot of stuff here. Any questions when it comes to some of these things we talked about?
Alan, we did have a question come in going back to the tool that you're using to show the ergonomic risk.
Mhm.
I think we're kind of wondering what tools have you used that can show that?
Okay, so I have nothing vested in this. So before I throw out some names of things, I'm not making any money off this. So that's step one. There are several safety AI tools. One's called Soter AI is one that I've looked into, SOTER. But there are several. Velocity AI is one, I think, as well. You can literally just do a Google search of AI safety tools. There's a lot out there that are available to you. So I've personally used Soter. They do. It's scary what they can do, right? So if you do a little bit of digging, you'll find a lot of stuff out. There's just so much, ever changing. Some of them there's a fee, but oftentimes it's very cost effective because you're not paying for an individual, right? So there's no fee of site time. You're just using the tool. So there's a lot out there. Like I said, Velocity is one that has several. But yeah, I recommend just doing a Google search. You'll find a lot. Like I said, Solar's one I personally used for about 6 months now. There's one other one I've looked into, Tumiki as one. I think it's Tumke, yeah, Tumeki is one that's fairly popular. They do a lot of advanced AI ergonomics as well. Look, I have no money in any of those things, so I've got no stake in any of that.
I see the same person is typing. I'm going to give her a moment to maybe follow up on that question. Oh, just to thank you on great information.
That's
As far as like the different regulations coming down for heat safety, what are some of the plans companies are putting in place really for that?
Yeah, so right now, truthfully, it's a lot of them are waiting until they kind of see exactly what this is going to look like. Because if in fact they're so what the initial approach was if it's 80 degrees, you're required to have several factors that would be extremely expensive. So there's a little bit of a waiting game now. Right now, what I'm seeing is a lot of assessments on installing fans, having someone that kind of, if there's an area of the building that's hotter than others, moving equipment around for their insulation, cool down stations, addressing their schedules to kind of work around some of these factors. But it's a big one, right? The heat thing is going to be a big factor if it goes forward the way that it was initially pushed, because if they say it has to be under 80 degrees, well, then there's only certain thing, we're forced to kind of do certain things. I don't know if it'll work out that way, but it's a little bit of wait and see with some of it. But a lot of it is companies that already have a safety person. The safety person is able to start doing this heat assessments to see what's there, addressing conditions. Usually, when you think about heat, it's time of year, it's operational, we're doing certain stuff. So assessing equipment, having cool down rooms, maybe instead of air conditioning the entire facility, we air condition a break room. So we have a colder room to go to in the event of we need to have some of the stuff in place.
Okay. I have someone asking a question. It looks like they're a client of MMA and just wondering if she should connect with MMA after the presentation about forklift certifications.
Shoot me an email. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if what the best way of getting my email, but yeah. My name, Alan, ALAN, Alan Lombardo with marshmma.com. But yeah, shoot me an email, and I can get you whatever you need.
Okay. Okay, another question back to the heat regulations. If it is for a certain period of time, the example here is a bakery operation. They have a cold room that is nearby, but the workers are in the heat.
Yeah, so that's to be determined, right? There will absolutely be a period of time, just like with any type of industrial hygiene concern. There will be like an exposure limit of what that's going to be. Not sure yet exactly that. It's still to come. So much of this politically, things have changed a lot in the restructure of OSHA. So it's not that I think it's going away, but it has slowed down a little bit on some of the formal aspects of it. So yes, that will be a factor. As soon as, and you can once again, you could Google this as well, as far as you can just type in OSHA heat stress requirements or heat stress injury prevention, and there's a lot of write-ups and initial briefs of what this is going to look like. But as of now, there is no formal standard on it yet. But all of that will be something that will be addressed. But you can once again, I hate to say look it up, but there's a lot of write-ups and a lot of blogs that have been written about it. that kind of goes back to some of the initial rhetoric and the framework that was in place and what could look like. That's why I mentioned the 80-degree thing, is that's the temperature that I see the most often. But some of the details are still pretty vague on what the final product's going to look like.
All right, something we will keep our eye on, and of course, push out some information on it as soon as we know. We want to let you know. Oh, I'm looking, there might be another question that just came in.
I appreciate the question. It's great.
Oh, yes, I see. It was an email address question. So I did get that taken care of. Okay, well, lots of great information today. I don't see any more questions coming in. Once again, we will send out this recording so that you are able to access that. Coming up, HireLevel has an event on May 13th. That is our next High Notes presentation. I just dropped the event into the chat if you'd like to register. It is an AI virtual workshop. So what that's going to entail exactly, I'm not sure, but with all of the changes in AI, it is great to get hands-on with some experts that really do understand it and how it can benefit our business and everything that we do. So really looking forward to that. Hope you all can join me then. Yes, Ruth, you will get a SHRM credit for this. Whenever we send out the recording a little bit later today, there will be a code in there as well that you can submit that for your SHRM credits. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Alan. Great information. And we will see you all next month. Have a great day.